episode of History Hack. As I am now contractually obliged to read all this, you are contractually obliged to listen to it. So if you are listening to this and you've particularly enjoyed this episode, not necessarily this bit, but the rest of it, do feel free to give us a 5-star review down on Amazon and or wherever you get your podcasts. Touch it. It's free. It's good for all of us. If you also want to know more about the podcast, you can head over to our website of historyhack.co.uk, where you can meet the team and or buy merchandise from our favourite beardy weirdy cartoonist who makes me look a lot better than I actually do. And there are some great t-shirts and merch available. If you really enjoyed this episode and you want to chuck us a drink, you can do so through Ko-fi. So that's ko-fi.com/historyhack. And if you really, really, really like us, maybe consider joining Patreon from £1 a month upwards. There are several tiers with different levels of perks, including Chris perks, which my lawyers are still going through because they feel there might be a violation of my human rights, although Alina said I have to be human for those to count. But if you head over to Patreon, that's patreon.com/historyhack, and see what you want to find there. Anyway, that's enough of my babbling. We should move on to the actual reason we're here. And today we are talking to Robert Hutton, who is a journalist and historian whose most recent works include Agent Jack, the story of MI5's secret Nazi hunter. But he's here today to talk to us about his new book, The Illusionist, the true story of the man who fooled Hitler. So, Robert, welcome to History Hack.
Hi, great to be here.
I'm excited we get a World War II episode. Alex keeps yelling at me for having too many, but I'm not going to stop. Sorry.
Why would anyone stop?
Exactly. And we're talking about spies, and we're talking about, stuff that's actually really interesting that both Chris and I enjoy.
So how many boats are in... No.
Stop it, Chris. That's not even funny. We're not friends anymore. You can record this episode on your own. Goodbye, everyone.
So the book's about Dudley Clark, but what do we know about him and his early war record?
Right. So, well, I'm not sure how many people know very much at all about Dudley Clark. For most of the time that I was writing this book, when people would ask me what I was writing about, I talk about Dudley Clark, I would see met with a blank expression. You've had to be not just a World War II nut, but really a World War II intelligence nut. Then the SAS Rogue Heroes drama dropped on the BBC, which has Dudley Clark in it, played by Dominic West in a lovely Chanel dress. And he sort of slightly stole that show. So at that point, people said, oh, right, SAS guy, which he is. But I think probably 5 years ago, if you'd heard of Dudley Clark, you would have heard of him because of his slightly notorious arrest. That's basically how I heard of him. And then as I started to dig into him, I realized that actually he's a far more important figure, which I'm sure we'll come on to. He's always an eccentric soldier. And he joins up in World War One, but as a teenager and can't get to the front. I think probably his father, who was involved with the Ministry of Defence, was actually working to keep him away from the front, because I think his father had a fairly good idea what was happening to teenage boys got there. And after the war, he stays in the army, and he becomes this sort of notorious eccentric. So he's always slightly insubordinate, but also very good. And so he's one of these people who can break the rules and get away with it because generals quite like him, because he's quite useful, quite efficient. He's the sort of person you want working for you, because at the point at which you say, do you know, I really think we should start working on X, he hands you a piece of paper that says, well, here is a plan for X. So if you wanted to do that. So he's spent the interwar period as becoming this sort of, somebody described him as the perfect military Jeeves. And I think that's quite a good way to put it. He starts the war sort of doing helpful jobs in the Ministry of Defence. He's sent to see if it would be possible to build a railway line from Cairo down to South Africa. I mean, he's not an engineer, so why did they send him? I think they sent him because this would largely be a political problem as well as an engineering one. And then he gets sent on a couple of missions to Norway during the British invasion, sort of carrying money and carrying messages. Essentially, carrying the second time he sent carrying messages to say everybody needs to get the hell out of there. he is sent in conditions of absolute secrecy to conduct negotiations with the Irish government, because the Irish are worried that the Nazis might invade Ireland, and they want to discuss the terms under which the British Army would return to the Republic of Ireland, which is that's a proper sensitive subject, and it's still not really understood in Ireland that these discussions ever took place. Certainly nobody. This is one of the things that Clark was forbidden from talking about after the war by the British government, because they wanted, I think, to stay on good terms with the Irish. And then, sort of, his final job in London is to invent the commandos, which is, if that's the only thing he'd done in the war, he'd still get a chapter in history books. And this is in the immediate wake of the retreat from Dunkirk. And he's a military assistant to Dill, who's the chief of the Imperial General Staff. And Dill is sort of worrying about how the army is going to maintain its fighting spirit when it's not fighting, when it's sitting in Britain. And Clark, of course, has been thinking about the answer to this question. And he's been thinking about how he was born in South Africa, and he's thinking about how people who the British Army had beat, how they behaved. And what they tended to do was form these little sort of guerrilla bands and then carry out what Clark called sort of mosquito attacks against the Nazi force. You butcher and bolt is another thing. You dive in, cut a few throats and run away again before this much larger, stronger force can turn around and engage with you. And Clark says we could form a force like that, and he sketches it all out. And he says they need a name, they need a good name. Let's call them the Commandos. It's what the South Africans used to call themselves when they were fighting against the British. And his vision of what a special forces unit might look like is, you read it today and you think, well, gosh, you pretty much sort of saw it all. These soldiers needed to think independently, and the army sort of beats independent thinking out of the British soldier, certainly at that point. And these guys need to be guys who can go somewhere and think for themselves and improvise and adapt and work out where they're getting their own meals from and this kind of thing. He also thinks that they should have this quality he calls dash, which is sort of what special forces like to have as well, even today. A little bit of kind of, what does he mean by dash? One of his first recruits is David Niven, the film star David Niven, because Clark is the most tremendous star fucker. So he can't meet a celebrity without wanting to be the celebrity's friend. And when David Niven sort of expresses an interest in getting involved in the Commandos, Clark's like, "Oh, you can come on board." So that's Dudley Clark. He's this sort of innovative, unusual thinker. He is borderline insubordinate, but also somebody that generals want around because he can create solutions.
We haven't really talked about him being suited for a role in espionage, because when you think of spies, you think of someone who is incredibly charming, who knows how to romance a woman. They know how to basically get shit done in a way that nobody else could figure out. And they're hardy. They know how to get out of a very, very difficult situation. Is he meeting all of these qualities at all?
He is certainly charming. It's not clear to how interested he was in romancing women. This is a touchy point. Clark's biography. My suspicion is that he's probably bisexual, and I'm sure we're going to come on to the circumstances of his arrest. He is certainly somebody who knows how to talk his way out of a tight spot. The thing about spying, I think, having written a couple of books about spies, is different spies do it in different ways, and they find their own way to make it work. So the last guy I wrote about, Eric Roberts, was very different from Dudley. So sort of Clark's a showman fundamentally. Eric Roberts is somebody who never wanted to be on stage, but what Eric Roberts' secret gift was that people really liked him, and they liked him and they trusted him, even when they really shouldn't have trusted him, because he was just such a nice man. And apparently, although actually also sending a report on his conversation with you back to MI5. Dudley Clark is a different kind of man. He is also likable and charming, and you sort of, for most of the war, if you wanted to find him, go to Cairo, go to somewhere like Shepherd's Bar or the Continental, one of these nice posh hotels, and go to the bar, and you'll find him there, holding court, surrounded by sort of admiring young men, with a cocktail in his hand, sort of telling stories and telling jokes. So he's definitely a charmer. I think his particular gift for the work that he did is that he's a storyteller, and he understands it. He understands the sort of having been an intelligence officer in between the wars, he understands what it is that intelligence officers do, which is sort of they try to build a picture of what the enemy are doing. And when he arrives in Cairo at the end of 1940, the job that he's given is by Wavell, who is then commanding British forces, is to start thinking about ways that the Nazis can be deceived. And Clark realizes almost instantly, he starts talking about that as, well, we will tell them stories. He knows that what a general is doing, when a general sort of looks at the map and looks at the sort of the enemy dispositions, is he is trying to tell himself a story. What are the British doing? What does it look like? And so Clark says, well, we will give him a story, and we will give him an incorrect story, but it will be one that fits the available facts. So that's his sort of that's his particular gift and his way of doing it. I mean, it's probably relevant here that his uncle was a magician, and so magicians are the people who probably more than anyone else practice deception on a daily basis, because they're constantly sort of trying to mislead their audience about what's going on, and they are constantly sort of trying to lead their audience to tell itself a story about what it's seeing on stage. You're seeing a woman being cut in half. You're seeing, a bunch of flowers produced from nowhere. So Clark understands the concepts. He'd learned from his uncle the concepts of sort of misleading people, or diverting people's attention, of what you can do to make someone look where you want them to look, and what you can do to make them relax when really they ought to be paying attention. So that's what he brings to the party.
And so they end up creating A-Force, don't they? Who are A-Force, and what were their first operations like?
So it's typical of Clark that the unit that he sets up has got a cool name. That's the kind of guy he is. And so he sort of...
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm sitting behind this camera. I'm just laughing away. I've muted myself on purpose because I know that I'd be quite reactive during this episode. But I do like him. He sounds like a really cool guy, and he sounds like he comes up with some of the best names possible.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So A-Force. I mean, who wouldn't want to work for A-Force? It's sort of it's a great name because it sounds cool. It could mean anything. It's sort of it's what it might mean, and this is relevant in 1941. Is he knows that one of the things that the Italians, who the army that they're most immediately facing at the start of 1941, the Italians are very worried about British airborne forces. Now, Clark knows that the Italians really don't need to worry desperately about British airborne forces, because Britain barely has any airborne forces. It's sort of, he just, when he was setting up the commandos, one of the first things obviously he thought about was, can we arrive by parachute? And although we are about to see the first British airborne raid, and that is going to be on southern Italy. It's not a great raid. Its main achievements, if it had any achievements, are to slightly worry the Italians, because it said, hey, look, we can drop troops in southern Italy if we want. Fair enough, they can't really achieve anything when they get there and they lastly get captured, but we can get them there. But no, the British really have no airborne capability. The Italians in North Africa are very worried about an airborne possibility. So Clark, one of his earliest deceptions is to create an imaginary airborne force, and significantly, the name he comes up with for his imaginary airborne force is the Special Air Service. And he writes an entire sort of story of this unit. Again, he's very thorough. So he writes this narrative. He describes how they came to be formed and what they're equipped with. He briefly considers whether they should arrive by helicopter, which I mean, helicopters just aren't capable of doing that at this point. But 30 years later, that's how special forces are going to be arriving in places, by helicopter. So Clark has seen, again, he's the kind of soldier who can see how wars will be fought. He's worked out this whole narrative, and he begins sort of dropping puzzle pieces in Cairo for Italian intelligence to find. And so he even sends out 2 soldiers with parachutist patches on their shoulders to wander the bazaars of Cairo, talking to people about their parachute training and so on. And so calling his deception unit, he can't call this deception unit the deception unit. Calling it A Force is partly in the hope that somebody will go, A stands for airborne. And it sticks. It sticks for the rest of the war. There's various bits of A Force, and at one stage there's an S Force as well. It is absolutely classic Clark. And when then sort of 6 months later, David Sterling, who as a posh young man has got to know Clark, comes to him and says, I'm thinking about setting up an airborne sort of special forces unit to go and do the kind of stuff that the commandos were supposed to do. Would you help me? Clark says, absolutely, I will help you. You know, I have the general's ear, and I will go and make the case for you. The one thing that you could do that would be really helpful is, could you call your real unit the Special Air Service? Because I've already been telling stories about this imaginary unit. So it would be very helpful, as it were, if you could put flesh on my imaginary bones. And again, it's classic Clark that the first unit of the Special Air Service is L Detachment, because he knows, you know, dealing with fascists and logical thinkers, if they come across an L Detachment, you know, that implies that elsewhere there are detachments A to K, right? They do this again and again. You know, you sort of, if you say that this unit here is the 10th Airborne or whatever, then there's a good chance that the Germans will say, well, there must be airborne units once and not somewhere else. It's classic Clark.
I just can't get over the line you've rolled where, let's just call it the deception unit. I mean, who in their right mind would want to call it something so blatantly obvious in documents, if you know what I mean? It's like somebody gets hold of, I don't know, classified documents. The deception. Now we know exactly what this is all about. We know all the information.
There is actually a moment in the war where Clark is briefly usurped. And while he's out of the country, and somebody else, one of Clark's strengths and weaknesses is that nobody knew what he was doing. And because nobody knew what he was doing, somebody else comes along and says, you know, well, we should have a deception operation, and I should run it, and I will be chief deception officer. Which is one of the many, when Clark gets back to Cairo and discovers this, he is fantastically rude, and he is partly fantastically rude about this aspect of it. You know, it's like calling yourself chief liar. You know, you're slightly giving the game away.
Passing out information is the easy part, but you've got to know how the information is going to get back to the Germans, because you could walk around a bazaar in Cairo going, yeah, look, we're paratroopers, and the locals just go, all right, cool, and that's it. But there are, because the Germans, the Abwehr, and are going to have agents around. How does he know how to get that information back to them?
But that's a really good question. So, I mean, Cairo is a great place to do this because Egypt has I think, probably a unique situation in the war. It is technically neutral, but it has signed a treaty that allows Britain to defend it. So the British Army is sitting in Egypt because it wants to defend the Suez Canal, is a crucial point. The British Army is sitting in Egypt, waiting to fight the Italians and the Germans in Egypt and in Libya. But the Libyans themselves the Egyptians themselves are neutral. So, for instance, you have a Japanese embassy there. There are still sort of Italians and German nationals, and at various points, the British, because they do have an army sitting in Egypt, have a lot of authority with the Egyptian government, and at various points they sort of say, right, you're now going to expel all of your neutrals and this kind of thing. You're now going to expel all of your Axis powers. But it's a weird situation, and because of that, it's a great place for both sides to do intelligence. So there is actually quite a good chance that that something that happens in a Cairo bazaar will find its way sort of back to enemy intelligence. They know, for instance, that that one of the Japanese diplomats is a spy, and they are very enthusiastic about sort of feeding him false information. You do have this problem that what exactly you always have this problem of deception of how do you know that the enemy is seeing your carefully constructed deception operation? That the deceivers working in London end of 1943, they begin an operation that's designed to look like a cross-channel invasion. And the goal of that is to draw the Luftwaffe up into the air so that the RAF can fight them over the channel and destroy them. So they sort of send this mock invasion fleet towards France, and the Germans don't notice, which is a failure of deception. So you do always have this problem of who's looking and where are they looking. And Clark's rule is you never put a deception over just by one route. So you've got your guys with their shoulder patches. He puts on his own shoulder patch and goes and gets on a train with this Japanese diplomat and sort of drops an envelope addressed to a Colonel Clark at the Special Air Service back in London, sort of while he's on the train. They also give stuff to newspapers. So for the Special Air Service, they plant a story about parachutists in the British Forces paper, and there's a really nice touch that again it just shows what a thinker he is. If anyone saw SAS Rogue Heroes, there's a bit in it early on where the Clark character sort of gets out this dossier, and it is the real dossier, by the way, or a copy of it, and says, "This is my imaginary Special Air Service unit. I left this in the presence of I can't remember which charge de defense, a Spanish defense attaché last night, so that he could copy it, so he could copy it all over the bar." That's never how Clark operated. So what he does instead is he plants this story with the British Forces paper that there were British parachutists training, and in the background of one of the photos they release, it's hard to see, but there's this guy in a spiked helmet, which is distinctively the helmet of the Transjordan police, who patrol the bit of the desert where this unit is supposed to be training. And his hope is that a German or Italian intelligence officer is going to see that picture, and they're going to think, you know what, the censor missed this, and I have spotted it. That tells me that this unit is training in the Jordan Desert. And aren't I clever? Because I have seen this. And because just, you can imagine psychologically, you're so pleased with yourself spotting this clue, that you're never going to sit there and think, what's this left for me? Because the story you're telling yourself is what a clever intelligence officer I am. I should file my report and then go and have a drink. It's a sort of it's an understanding of the psychology of the people that he's trying to fool, that enables him to do this kind of thing. The way they talked about it was one of his officers said, "You should never hand the Bosch the thing on a plate. Just give him a little piece here and a little piece there, and let him put the puzzle together, and let him feel clever for having put the puzzle together. And if you've designed the puzzle pieces that you give him right, when the British plan turns out to be different from the way that he's assembled it, the enemy won't think, oh, I've been fooled. He'll think, damn, I put the puzzle pieces together the wrong way. Because actually, you see, they could have fitted it together this other way, and that would have described what I was seeing." And so he's not just thinking, how can I fool them, but how can I keep fooling them? How can I just keep this fish on the line and just keep giving them bad information? And Clark's goal, and he reaches this really early, sort of by the middle of 1941. He's thinking, he says, what we need to have is, we don't just do sort of fooling the Germans here or fooling the Germans there, little operations. We need a complete deceptive plan for winning the war, where we will tell Hitler, who is his target, we will tell him a completely false story about what it is that we're going to do. And that way, it won't be about sort of trying to win a battle by making somebody defend their left flank when actually the attack is coming on the right. It will be about winning the war by making the Germans defend Norway or the Balkans or Greece when actually we're going through Normandy. And we're going up through Italy. And can we get the enemy to put whole armies in the wrong place?
Do you think they were aided in a way by the fragmentation of the German intelligence force? Because you've got the Abwehr under Canaris doing the military stuff, and then sort of by I think about 42, you've got Schellenberg doing it for the SSSD, and then you've got Ribbentrop, who's also trying to set up a foreign and intelligence service through the embassies. So, and they're all sort of competing to try and get one-upmanship. Do you think there is that kind of, oh, quick, we found something. Yeah, that looks good. Yeah, and so they're just hurrying it so that they can be the first one to go into the Führerbunker and go, look, we've found these photographs of soldiers exercising out in the desert, and this is the way they're going to go, without doing like the proper due diligence.
Absolutely. That is one of the reasons why this works so well, is because German intelligence is so very, very bad, and astonishingly bad. The British can't believe how bad it is. One of Clark's friends, I think about 42, this guy who spent a long time in Germany before the war, and had a lot of respect for the Germans, thought they were serious people, and he said, I just can't believe how bad they are. I always thought they were really good, and he said that they're rubbish, and their German intelligence isn't respected within the German army, so it's not the base of the army that sort of the high flyers go into, and it is completely fragmented, and it is the nature, I think, of a totalitarian government that there is very little incentive to be self-critical. And say, this is right, could we have done this better? Instead, what you get is people who are the incentive is to sort of if you have found an agent, to pretend that he's a good agent. Where if you're in German intelligence and you go and you say, look, I've got this guy, he's working for me in London or in Cairo or whatever, and actually I'm beginning to worry that he's been turned. I'm beginning to worry that he's working for the other side. That there is never an incentive in any intelligence organization to say that about your own agent. It's such an awful thought, because you immediately, oh my goodness, what have we told him? What has he told us? It's bad to say that in British intelligence. As a special operations executive, struggle when they start to suspect that that some of their people have been turned in Holland. They spent ages trying not to believe it. You do that in Germany and you might get shot. So you're never going to do that. And there's a lovely line in one of the British post-war analyses that the German intelligence officers broadly divided into two groups. Those who were too stupid to understand that they were being manipulated, and those who were smart enough to understand that they were being manipulated, but also sufficiently smart to realize that they should on no account reveal their suspicions to anyone higher up. And that's the tension in German intelligence. So did it help that these people were sort of competing courts fighting against each other? Absolutely it did. That said, credit to the British for making the absolute most of it. They start off assuming that these people are much better than they are, and as they start to realize, one of the things that Clark does is he realizes that you need to start inflating the size of your forces in the enemy mind, because that's how you can create imaginary threats. If you say, well, we've got more troops than you think. And when he starts out, he says, look, we probably shouldn't try and do this by more than 30% because they'll start to get suspicious. And then they start capturing German documents and they think, oh my goodness, we've actually already managed to do it by 50% because they've literally believed everything we sent them. And once a fake unit goes into the German system, it never gets taken out. So they never ever say, do you know what? I'm not sure that this airport actually exists. So they find that they can do stuff that really shouldn't work. The deceivers are, for instance, at various points they want to create a threat to Norway because they know that Hitler's really sort of keen on Norway. British have no intention of invading Norway. They've tried fighting in Norway once. They didn't like it. It's not going to happen again. But they discovered that you can never threaten Norway too much in Hitler's mind. Hitler is convinced that there's going to be, the decisive battle is going to be fought in Norway. So you can keep threatening this place long after it should be plausible. There's various moments where Clark will reject an idea because he will say, well, obviously we wouldn't do that. We can't tell the Germans that we will do this because that would be bonkers for us to do that. And then they will discover some document that says actually the Germans did believe that they might do that. And he said it's a reminder that you have to think with their mind. You don't have to think what is reasonable for us to do. You have to remember, what they think it's reasonable to do. I mean, the classic example actually is in the build up to D-Day, and lots of talk about the sort of the D-Day deceptions recently. And there's this imaginary army in Kent, the First United States Army Group, and Patton is put in charge of it. Now, Patton is in disgrace for the Allies because of the soldier snapping incident in Sicily. So, to the Allies know that Patton can't be put in charge of a major army because he's in disgrace. Hitler doesn't believe that anyone will put someone in disgrace for slapping a soldier. I mean, that makes no sense to the Nazis. So, of course, you mean, what did he do? He hit someone. Who cares? So you can do it because although it makes no sense to you, it makes sense to them. They continually amaze themselves with the stories that they find it's possible to put over to the Germans.
Let's move over to North Africa because by May 1941, things are not looking. They're not looking good, though, are they? Out there, down there.
No, the North African War it's sort of it basically it goes through this weird cycle where both 1941 and 1942 sort of look the same up until the Battle of El Alamein. And so the year will start with the British having won a great victory and got to the far side of the Cyrenaic Desert, which is an empty bit of Libya between Egypt and sort of the bits of Libya. And then in spring 41, Hitler sends one of his favorite generals, Owen Rommel, out to help the Italians out. And Rommel, being Rommel, immediately starts pushing the British back, and the British push all the way back. back to Egypt, and Tobruk is under siege. And at the end of 1941, the British attack and push Rommel all the far side of the Cyrenaic Desert. And then at the start of 1942, Rommel pushes back again. So there's this sort of, it's called The Pendulum of War. Is one of the famous books about all of this, because the forces seem to swing right back and forth. But no, in the summer of 41, at that point, the British, every time the British have fought the Germans have won. The British have just been fighting the Germans in Greece and have had to retreat in ignominy, and they just lost Crete, and Tobruk is under siege, and it's all going quite badly at that point. And there is a bit of a, are we ever going to be able to fight these guys anywhere kind of sense.
Yeah, although I'm slightly off topic, I do think Rommel's overrated.
No, he's good at what he does.
No, he's not.
No.
He's not, but that's a different podcast. That's an argument in the pub.
They're in a completely legitimate, could he ever have got any further than he did West? And is there any point in any of the stuff that he's doing? Question. All of that is completely fair, but the British are certainly terrified of it.
But let's talk about someone else that appears in this story. Who is Wrangle Clanker, and what went wrong for him?
Right. So Clark operates under aliases, and I mean, he is a proper spy at various points. He's not just an officer sitting in Cairo. He goes to Istanbul first of all in 41, and he goes under civilian cover as a journalist. And then he that sort of sets up what he calls various intelligence channels for spreading lies to the Axis powers through Istanbul. And then later in 41, he goes first of all to Lisbon, where he tries to do the same thing. All these neutral capitals are great places to do your spying from. Because you can sort of, they're next to countries that are fighting wars, but you yourself, both sides can sort of operate with some level of impunity. So first of all, he goes to Lisbon, and then in October 41, he goes to Madrid. And the first that anyone in London knows about the fact that he's gone to Madrid. So Clark goes to Madrid, and the first thing that anyone knows about this in London is when this sort of confused telegram arrives to the British consul in Madrid that says that Times war correspondent has been arrested, dressed down to a brassiere as a woman, and this to the diplomats in Madrid, this is a consular problem, a Brit misbehaving themselves abroad. In London, this causes total panic. This is discussed in a meeting with the Chief of the Bureau of General Staff, the Foreign Secretary, the Defence Secretary, and Winston Churchill. So, say the Defence Secretary, the War Secretary, as he then was, and Winston Churchill. And they don't know what's happened. Has Clark lost his mind? He's definitely not under orders to go around Madrid in a woman's dress. It turns out the Spanish police have raided his hotel, and he turns out to have a second complete outfit. His explanation for this keeps changing, but really makes no sense. He says that he's a novelist. He's telling the police he's a novelist who wants to sort of to observe men's reactions. He's not terribly convincing. As a woman, it has to be said, because he's got a military haircut, so he's covered with a turban. He's quite tall. I mean, he's short for a British man, but quite tall for a Spanish lady. And he's got a visible in the photographs sort of prominent Adam's apple. So it's not a complete surprise that he was arrested. This is there is the has Clark lost his mind question. There is the are the Germans going to figure out who Clark is question, because if the Germans, Spain is neutral, but leaves fascist, has a fascist government. If the Germans had had the wit to abduct Clark at this point, smuggle him back to Germany, and torture him, he has all sorts of secrets in his head. He knows, first of all, the British plan to attack Rommel. That's quite imminent. He has been sitting in the 20 Committee, which is MI5's committee controlling all of its double agents in England, so he knows about all of that. He's not been indoctrinated into Ultra, the breaking of the German code yet, but I'm probably aware that the British have got some rather good sources. So again, if you sort of tortured him and found out what the British knew, that might give you a good avenue of investigation. So it's tremendously important to the British to just get him out, which they do eventually, and they rush him over the border to Gibraltar, where there's this row about whether he should be allowed to go back to Cairo or whether he should be sent back to London in disgrace. And Churchill wants him sent back to London, and could have changed Clark's entire war had at this stage the German Navy felt it to be. But people will have to read the book to find out exactly what happened. But this is the absolute crisis of Clark's war, and there are possible theories about what's going on here. And it is actually my operating assumption is that it was probably he was doing it for kicks. But it is actually not impossible that this was part of an intelligence operation, and there are clues in the files that lead to a possible explanation that Clark might actually have been doing this in order to get alongside a German intelligence officer. So I explore that possibility in the book.
Robert, there is so much more to this story. So much more to the story. We have only, touched the tip of the iceberg. There's just a lot more for us to be able to talk about. We could probably do it for another good few hours. But if people want to know the full story, they need to go out and buy your book, don't they?
Yes, please. Yes.
Can you remind our listeners the name of your book?
It is called The Illusionist, the true story of the man who fooled Hitler, and it's in all the bookshops now.
Fabulous. We'll get your book into our bookshop, which basically means you get a slice, we get a slice, and of course that shop that's named after a river won't be building, what is it, Chris, their rocket?
Rocket, Death Star. The lawyers are still in touch. I've got to be careful what I say.
I can send you signed book plates if you want. I don't know if that's any use.
Robert, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
I've got to do our usual spiel, and I'm really sorry, but if you listen to the end, then you'll be able to hear my awesomely funny joke. I've got a good one today. You can leave us a 5-star review on Apple. Feel free to type in anything. We really don't care. Just get those rankings up so more people can see the podcast. You can also head to our website, which is www.historyhack.co.uk, where you can get merch and our bios and lots of really fun, cool cartoons. You can also fund us by giving us a drink on Ko-fi, which is ko-fi.com/historyhack. My dogs are starving. They need to be fed. They have a very, very rich diet. Or you can be one of our Patreon supporters. We have special episodes out every month for you, and you can subscribe on www.patreon.com/historyhack. And we also have some fabulous Chris perks. I'm still waiting for the Chris perk where I get to read, or Chris gets to read out a personalized message to someone, so that will be up and coming. And now I'm going to leave you all because my joke is epic this time, and the question is, what kind of car does a sheep like to drive? A Lamborghini. Thanks very much, guys.